Welcome to the Big 12 Insiders, your Big 12 sports show. Here's your host, Brien Hanley.
Hey, everybody, what's going on? This is your man, Big B, Brien Hanley. Welcome back to Big 12 Insiders. Today, we've got our man, Mitch Harper, who covers BYU for 24/7 Sports. Appreciate him giving us his time today. Mitch, how are you doing, my man?
Doing great, Big B. I'm happy to be on once again and getting ready for another football season.
Absolutely. All the off season, the rumors and drama, not just around BYU, just in general. It just all that stuff can be over with, and we can finally start talking some real football. So I'm super excited. Thanks for giving us your time today. Let me just get right into this. First thing is the quarterback battle at BYU. I saw reports today, or actually early this morning, that said that it's basically down to two guys now. Is that correct?
I would expect so. Bear Bachmeier, a true freshman, a former four-star prospect who initially signed with Stanford in the 2025 cycle. He transferred to BYU in the spring window. And then redshirt sophomore McKay Hillstead, who's a former Utah State quarterback, three-star signal caller in the 2023 cycle. So those are the top two guys getting the first team reps, and that's on the heels of BYU's first scrimmage last Saturday, where it was a day where the coaches were in agreement that it was a day won by the defense decisively.
Right.
So, BYU's quarterback situation, although there's two guys maybe getting the most first team reps, there's still a lot of work to be done to really kind of give confidence and assurances that this team is going to be one that's contending for the Big 12 again. I think people underestimate the gap between Jake Ratzlaff, returning veteran, and these quarterbacks who have never taken a snap in BYU's offense. So I think though, but there's a lot of excitement about what Bear Bachmeier and McKay Hillstead could do from the coaching staff.
Right. And in the offseason, people, I think you're right, because I saw it all over social media, and fans kind of downplayed what Jake Ratzlaff brought to the program and kind of just looked at his numbers and thought, well, that's easy to replace. And I'm like, well, if it was easy to replace, everybody would just do that. I go, it's not just easy to replace your starting quarterback. And so while it might take a little bit of time, I look at their schedule, and we'll get into the schedule in a minute, and it might be the best thing for what's going on right now. And it's not just losing a quarterback, Mitch. It's losing your starting quarterback when you did. Now, again, maybe BYU knew this was coming a while back, but when you did lose them, it was after spring ball. That's tough.
It is. And, to the point of if they knew or not, it was very interesting deal where the day that there was the lawsuit was announced on Jake Ratzlaff earlier that morning, he was on BYU's in-house media wing on a TV appearance. So it seemed like they were all kind of maybe flat-footed. Maybe Jake knew,
right.
But BYU themselves, they've even told me their AD said they knew that day.
Right.
So, but they move on. And Jake Ratzlaff, I think the thing is with him is that Aaron Roderick was really planning to give him full autonomy over the offense, checking into the right plays, audible. Everything with the offense, they were going to give to him. And you don't have that luxury with these QBs with how young and inexperienced in this offense they are. So I think that's where the gap comes. But if, one of these quarterbacks can trim down the 12 interceptions that Ratzlaff had, which was tied for the most in the Big 12 last season, you could be in a position to win a lot of ball games, because I do believe this defense will be really good to pair up with the offense. They were the number one big defense in the Big 12 last year. I think they're going to be potentially better this season with more depth. So there's some good things with BYU, but yeah, all eyes are on the quarterback position with Bear Bachmeier and McKay Hillstead being those, what appear to be those top two guys right now as they're settling into week 3 of camp.
Right. So, you mentioned, you kind of touched on that, what they're going to have to lean into this year. Last year, from 2023 to 2024, BYU got more physical. I talked to you about that before. We've heard Coach Satani talk about it. We heard players talk about it, that going into the Big 12 in 2023, they realized after the season, okay, we have to be a more physical football team. And a lot of that is running the football. BYU was a more physical football team last year, but Jiminy Christmas, it's tough when I want to say they were on their third running back last year, based on injuries. I'll assume that they're going to lean into that physicality again, especially as you're getting your quarterback up to speed this year and being a more physical run the football type of team.
It's a great point, Big B, because you and I were in Dallas when LJ Martin, BYU's leading rusher, goes down, and he was having a lot of success early in what ended up being such an underrated win, not only for BYU, but the Big 12 conference at large, to go into SMU, a playoff team, and win that game. But LJ Martin goes out early with an ankle injury, and that just snowballed into LJ Martin, and then Miles Davis, and then Enoch Nawahine, and then Sione Mo, all these names. They were going into their fifth running back going into the Kansas State game, which ended up being a massive breakthrough win for BYU. But yes, they turned to their depth extensively at the running back position last year. Now, that was an inconvenience at the time, but it was one of the reasons that this coaching staff did not turn to the portal at the running back position, because they got valuable game snaps, films of all of these guys pretty much, and they liked what they saw from those games. And so they're turning to those guys to lead the way. And the guy that's going to definitely be the one to look to is LJ Martin, who has led BYU in rushing yards the past 2 seasons. I would expect a huge workload for LJ Martin. When Aaron Roddick was asked, what type of numbers they want to give LJ every single game, he didn't put a specific cap on that. And I think this is LJ kind of leaned out a little bit. Last year, he focused on adding a lot of extra weight. He got up, an additional 20 pounds. He shredded a little bit of that, trimmed down a little bit. He looks great in camp. It's the healthiest he's been since he's been at BYU. He's been a guy that's dealt with the ankle, as I noted, shoulder injuries, just various injuries in his 2 seasons at BYU. If they can keep him healthy, I think he's going to be one of the best running backs in the Big 12 this year. I'm really bullish on the potential of LJ Martin, a former Texas Tech commit. Then he flips to Stanford. Then he ends up at BYU, and BYU is really excited to have him. And he's a meek, humble kid. But it was really shocking that, he ended up going to Big 12 media days, because he never spoke really at all for his first 2 seasons. Now, as Kalani's noted, he's finding his voice within the program. And it's noteworthy because he's emerging as a leader of this team. And I think that helps when you're trying to be the best player on a team, potentially, at least on one side of the ball. And I think he can fit that billing for BYU this year.
Absolutely. Good for him and good for the program overall. You mentioned the defense and how good, number one, the defense was spectacular last year. But I also feel like this, though, Mitch, I don't think a lot of people talked about that so much. They were the best defense in the Big 12. And while maybe some Big 12 fans maybe kind of noticed that, I guess, I don't think it was something that was talked about enough. I mean, they were the number 14 defense in the entire country last year, BYU was. Do they feel a little disrespected or slighted? Because you're talking about how they're going to be even better this year because of the depth that they have. Is that something that maybe is on their mind, or do they not even feel or see any of that?
I think they feel it, because BYU is just an overlooked team, period. I mean, the Big 12 at large gets overlooked, and we saw that with the playoff. I mean, everything about BYU, people just chalked up to saying, lucky team, last second wins, Oklahoma State, last second win. I mean, they just were always viewed as the team that got lucky. But when you dive into that team last year, they were an excellent defense, and they had a lot of talent. I mean, Isaiah Glasker, I think you start with him. Linebacker, led the Big 12 in tackles for loss with 12.5 last season. I think he's going to be an NFL guy next year. He's a redshirt junior, but a little bit older because he had that COVID year. But I think Isaiah Glasker is going to be really good. And then you pair him up with Jack Kelly, might be the fastest linebacker that BYU has. I think he could be an NFL guy too. So you have those two guys, and then the overall depth at that linebacker position. I mean, they feel like they go 8 deep at that spot, and it might, create a situation where BYU has to go, a little bit more of an odd front, and they get an extra linebacker out on the field with how deep they go. And they've got some questions in the interior in the depth at defensive tackle with Oklahoma State transfer Justin Kirkland, who came over in the spring portal window. He's dealing with a little bit of a knee injury right now. So that's a little bit thinner at D tackle than they wanted. But I think the overall pass rush, they lose Tyler Batty, first team all Big 12 performer. That's a big loss. He's
Mhm.
making a dent as an undrafted free agent with the Minnesota Vikings right now. But the speed, the athleticism, I think what you're seeing too is being in the Big 12 has allowed BYU to really build up its second and third team units. I mean, I've been covering BYU football for a very long time, and you just watch camp right now, and some of their third team guys that are deep, freshman developmental guys right now, but just the body types, the size, the measurables, people on the outside that don't follow this league as closely and just chalk it up to, well, it's an inferior league. Like, if these guys develop, and this coaching staff with Kalani Sitake, Jay Hill, that is their bread and butter. They develop guys and get the most out of them. BYU's in a pretty good place long term, and I just think that this is a talented defense, and their safeties, they go about 5 deep where they feel like they could be starter caliber players. Cornerback's a little bit of a question. There'll be more cornerback by committee this year because they lose Jacob Robinson, who's currently with the San Francisco 49ers, Mark Collins, who went to the CFL. Those were 2 good cornerbacks, but I think, again, the speed. I was talking with BYU's cornerbacks coach just this week, and he told me it's the fastest cornerback unit that he's had since he joined the staff 10 years ago. So there's some really good pieces, and it's just kind of bringing it all together and guys stepping into elevated roles. But there's also a lot of returning experience too. And how could I forget Keanu Tanavasa, Utah defensive tackle transfer? He's probably going to be the leader of it all that brings it together as kind of that vocal tone setter every single week for this defense.
Absolutely. So, and I'm glad you touched on it, because that's why I thought BYU was such a good fit for this conference, is because now we're seeing a little bit different from Texas Tech, but for the most part, teams in the Big 12 are developmental programs. Yes, they're going to dip into the transfer portal just like everybody should, because it's available. But your bread and butter for most of the programs within this conference are developmental. I know me and you have talked about that before. I just think it's worth noting again because it's true. And you're starting to see that. And I think what you mentioned about BYU being that developmental program, you're starting to see more talent in the depth, because you got to have depth in this league. People can poo-poo the league all they want. They're just not paying close enough attention. You have to have depth, just like with anything, as far as college football or football in general. You got to have depth. And when you don't, because we know injuries are a part of it, that's where problems come in. So it's good to see BYU, establishing that. And I know that the fans are glad that they're establishing in that. Kind of taking a page here and turning the page, I should say. Looking at the schedule. The schedule right now, for a lot of BYU fans, seems to be pretty manageable, Mitch. I look at it, and obviously you don't want to underestimate anybody in this league, because we saw what happened last year. So anybody can do anything. But if just on paper and you look at it, BYU right in the middle of the schedule have those 4 tough games, Utah, Iowa State, at Texas Tech, and TCU. But if you can manage that, Mitch, this sets up pretty well for BYU again.
It's a schedule that could create an opportunity for BYU to get on a run. And I think that the non-conference schedule is very manageable, with an FCS opponent in Portland State, then Stanford, and then a bye, which at the time I thought was kind of strange scheduling by BYU's former AD to have a bye in week 3 and not get out of that East Carolina game that's 2 time zones away. But now with a new quarterback, maybe it's nice to have 4 full weeks in the season to get that quarterback ready, whoever it ends up being, for Big 12 play. And I do think, though, some of the spots of the schedule, when you look at, Colorado early in the season, we know Coach Prime's teams have gotten off to strong starts early. So I would expect another strong start from Colorado. So you get that first Big 12 opener, late night, Big 12 after dark in Boulder. I think that's going to be an electric atmosphere, and that's going to be a tough game. And I know that Colorado's got a, overhauled roster turning to the portal, but I'm sure for the returning guys that from last season, they'd like to get revenge for that Alamo Bowl performance last year in San Antonio. So I think that's going to be a tough game. But I think, West Virginia on a Friday night, I like BYU there. At Arizona, I think Arizona will be improved, but I think BYU should be the favorite. And then, October 18th, Utah. interesting spot for the league to move from early November to middle of October. That's a little bit kind of a head scratcher to me to put the game there. To me, I think you should have kind of like an appointment weekend for BYU Utah if it's going to be outside the traditional rivalry weekend. Arizona State is getting that slot. So I think it's, interesting that game just continues to rotate, but I do like it from the standpoint of, to avoid the last weekend. I saw it last year with BYU and Utah. There is a massive, maybe might be a weird term to use for BYU, but a massive hangover effect after that game. BYU goes into that Kansas game last year, and that just seemed like a beaten, tired football team.
Right.
And maybe it's good to have it in the middle of the season, but I look at that the following week though at Iowa State. Gosh, I almost look at that as just a built-in loss because of Utah the week before, on the road at Iowa State. That's going to be a tough game. And BYU got hammered by the Cyclones 2 years ago in Provo. So yeah, it's a tough schedule, but I think it's also manageable. Like, I think it's like what everyone thinks in the Big 12, where it's like, yeah, I can draw up 11 wins, but I can also see a path to 5. And that's
right.
That's kind of the beauty of this league. And I think it's going to be really fun. I'm that November stretch though, too, with Texas Tech, TCU. Those are the two teams that I right now have as kind of the favorites in my view to get to Arlington and win the Big 12. So I look at those two games as really difficult. And I think Cincinnati's going to be a bowl team and be, one of the best wide receiver units in the Big 12 this year. So it's a tough schedule. Every week, we always got to bring it and be at their best if they want to be, a 10-win team like they were last season.
Absolutely. One last thing before I get you out of here, Mitch. Obviously, we're not going to get into the drama of what happened with the quarterback situation. It's not really relevant. What is relevant, I would say, is how the team moves past it. With the transfer portal being what it is right now, Mitch, all over the country, to me, and I'm going to ask this of you, does it make it easier to move past situations like this because you're used to guys moving on? Maybe guys that you don't think are going to move on, they tend to move on. And maybe that hasn't happened that often at BYU, but does this make it a little easier? Now, granted, it's the quarterback position, a guy that you expected to be your starter. Yeah. So clearly that makes it, difficult as far as a game, situation. But as a program, does it make it easier because of the transfer portal where guys move and, come and go a lot? Does it make it easier, or is it no, this is the quarterback position, he was our built-in, starter, and this is just super, super difficult to deal with?
I think you make a good point that the almost transactional nature of the sport, I think fans are almost used to it. They look at it like he transferred or just moved on. So I think from that sense, yeah, it's more manageable because these locker rooms, I think they're used to players coming and going. I mean, for example, in spring, BYU had an All-American kick returner, a guy that was just doing outstanding things in spring, and Keelan Marion, he ups and leaves and goes to Miami, and he's going to be a really good player for the Miami Hurricanes. But so that's just kind of what these players are used to. So I do think it's manageable now, but I think with BYU, it's a little bit different because you're pairing up what was a civil lawsuit, and then and then it became, when that got dismissed with prejudice, then it became an honor code focus, and then he withdraws, and then it kind of brings focus into BYU's rules. But BYU kind of prides itself, or not kind of, they pride themselves on their standards and their honor code, and they're always going to uphold that. And so, but I do think though, with the Ratzlaff situation, it ended up being a win-win for everyone involved, because when that came out in May, I mean, it was hard to imagine a scenario where he was going to keep playing football. It was his last year of college eligibility, and there was no portal window open. Like, people talked about, oh, he can go into the portal. It's like, no, that wasn't available. He had to take the road less traveled, where he's now a walk-on at Tulane, and then he finds a way to enroll, takes his credits, and all that. It's a tricky path that's not as easy as the portal. But I think it ended up being a win-win. And by all accounts, it seems like he's doing a nice job down there in Tulane. And I think BYU, they were fortunate to get Bear Bachmeyer in the spring portal. I think this would be a really different outlook right now for the quarterback position. I think McKay Hillstead's got a lot of talent, and I think he could be a really good quarterback for BYU. But I think Barrett just kind of had made sure to elevate everyone's play because, he was someone that this coaching staff identified as a sophomore, but he committed to Stanford. But they've liked him for a long time. Aaron Roderick, the offensive coordinator, and the staff. So it's an intriguing team. And Kalani Sitake's got, some job security now. He got a long-term extension. The new AD loves Sitake. Heck, he added him as an associate AD. So it feels like it's not a situation like last year where it felt like, oh, you got to get to bowl eligibility, or this could be a decision. Whereas now it feels like, BYU is got their personnel in place. They're putting together, nationally relevant recruiting classes. Now they got a top 25 class in the 2026 cycle with Ryder Lyons, a 5-star quarterback. Like there's a lot of good things happening. So you just don't want to see a 5-win season this year. If you can get to 8, that would be a nice step in the direction with considering the circumstances with the QB. I think you take that, but obviously expectations are always high at BYU, and people want to get to Arlington.
Absolutely. Well, Mitch, man, we appreciate you giving us your time today, man. I know your time is valuable, so thank you for coming on, and I'm sure I'll be talking to you during the season, my man.
You bet. Always happy to do it.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate you. We will be back soon. Remember to like, follow, subscribe. We will talk to you soon.
Thank you for watching the Big 12 Insiders, your Big 12 sports show. This has been a Spirit Street production.